Hi, Joe.
Hey, Relitza.
It is great to have you here. Could you please introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a little bit more about you?
Oh, it'd be a pleasure. Thank you. So, my name's Joe Goss, and I work for Fixflo. Hopefully, you're aware of Fixflo, a software company, SaaS, repairs, maintenance, and compliance platform. Um, I've just had my 5-year anniversary. So,
Cool. Congrats.
thank you. It's a tougher world out there in sales, but I always say I'm a block manager before I'm a salesperson. So, before I joined Fixflo, which was in week one, lockdown one, as a field-based sales exec. It was a bit, I think, could have been touch and go, but I literally left my block management job on Friday the 13th, lucky for some,
Wow.
to Friday the 13th of March 2020. Started with the Fixflo on the 16th of March 2020 um, for onboarding, being in London every week because I'm actually home based in Bristol. And yeah, I couldn't do that. I was sent home on the Wednesday, and there we go.
5 years later.
5 years later, still here. But
Wow.
before that, yeah, I was a block manager for pretty much 10 years. So
Amazing.
yeah, I started in 2010. I think it was March or April 2010 with an independent managing agent in Bristol. It's quite a fun story. I actually placed the guy who went on to become the MD there. We became friends, hung out, and he invited me to join the company,
Hmm.
having known each other for about 6 or 7 years. So that was cool, yeah.
Oh, amazing. I hope they use Fix now.
They
Um,
they 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 do, yeah. And I was with them twice. I left and went back. I've worked in property recruitment for 8 years, all in the property sector. So social housing. I run a temps desk, as they call it,
mhm.
placing housing officers. So I got some great stories from the public sector. Really good
Amazing.
war stories there. Fantastic. And
Amazing. What
yeah.
what kind of properties did you manage when you were a property manager?
So my bread and butter were converted townhouses, most of which were listed buildings.
Mm,
Grade two star. Didn't have any grade one listed, but yeah, they all had their challenges. I had some 1960s and 70s purpose-built blocks, some of those old school ones that had communal laundry facilities.
oh, wow.
A few
Okay.
stories there, definitely.
Yeah.
Um, Swimming pools, gyms, gated communities. My personal favourite. Yeah, ex-lunatic asylum. That was fun.
I think a lot has changed, obviously since COVID, but before COVID, things were a little bit different in property management. And what was your typical day?
My typical day was, I think, pre-kids was getting up pretty early, being a diligent kind of guy, getting on my bike, cycling up to the office at 7 o'clock or half 7, sometimes earlier, trying to deal with emails. What was it, 100 emails a day, probably when I left in 2020, but when I started, it wasn't as bad as that. I think as our customers became more digitally astute, just it
Mm,
really ramped up the commerce. A typical day would be, yeah, desk, leases, insurance claims,
yeah.
email from that person in that particular block. There's one in every block, I think, is maybe a common theme that I hear in the sector.
Yes, yes, it is. Still it
Yeah,
is.
so we like check that email from that person and respect where they're coming from, being professional, but really trying to reprioritize and writing down. I think mostly I was quite manual, pen and paper,
Yes,
and I'd
it
be
is.
at the end of the day, I'd write down the things that I must do the next day to begin with. And I didn't have any great tech really then. It was email and it was spreadsheets, and we used QuickBooks for
Yeah.
tracking service charges. So I would check balances of particular buildings where I knew I had to instruct works, look at what I had to do for that building. Invariably, it was another spreadsheet, and then reprioritize. So constant reprioritization, planning where I'd go out. If I had an AGM or a directors meeting, have I got all my documents ready for that? So yeah, typical day, constant replanning.
Absolutely. Well, it hasn't really changed much.
Okay, so it
It,
hasn't
it
changed.
it it seems, yeah. We're still just AGMs on Teams. It's more
I
something.
think I would have liked that, but do you have a balance with those? Do you try and mix it up?
Only if we have more residents, more property owners living in a
Mm.
building, which is rare for London. And yeah, otherwise, I think it's maybe 1% from the buildings we manage that we do in face to face. Everything else is in some buildings we don't even come round to do AGM sometimes. So yeah, budgets are quickly done. As you know, some properties are quite problematic, some aren't, and they're just easy to manage. So it depends really.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. But yeah, I'm kind of actually slightly surprised at the amount that is now done over Zoom, Teams.
I must say a lot of owners are not only outside London but overseas as well.
Big time, and then they're just less interested. I mean, my portfolio, there were quite a lot of owner occupiers. People were quite vested in the common parts and their
Mm,
grounds and making sure that the dressed bath stone detail was nice. They kind of appreciated the value in their asset.
yeah.
But then had some blocks where maybe over 50% were tenanted. But I think it's mainly the demographic where I was working. So I felt like with most of my portfolio was RMC director led, the whip was constantly being cracked.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of challenging cases, I I am looking forward uh, hearing some stories from you.
Yeah, I've been racking my brains today and on and off over the last few days, knowing preparing for this and
Oh,
what
wow.
what can we talk about? There are so many to choose from.
Yeah, I mean, anything that comes in mind, because there are always few that you just always will remember, right? And it's like, what was the problem? How you are navigating the project? Who called you? Who did you call? In terms of professional bodies involved in disagreements or anything that falling ceilings or I don't know.
Oh yeah, just so many, and we could go from maybe the slightly easier and procedural from the first signs of okay, that's not okay on a property visit with quite extreme hoarding in a converted
Hmm.
listed building, which was pending a new interlinked fire alarm system, and the guy was known to be a hoarder, and we'd had communications with the actual leaseholder because he was a tenant, but it was a family member, and it was a really prominent building where I was managing this block. It was 10 flats, uh, and I thought, okay, well, I've never really dealt with hoarding
Mm,
at all.
I
So
don't think
where do I
I
go?
have.
Actually, I googled it, of course, but I ended up finding great advice from the local fire authority, and they had a scale of hoarding, and it was this picture of increasing levels of clutter. I thought, no, it's not one, it's worse than that. It's not two, it's worse than that.
Mm,
It's not three. And then when it got to three or four, have you seen these levels?
don't think so.
Oh, if any of the people listening, watching, check it out, I'm sure they'll find some things. But I quickly recognised that I probably need to actually speak to the local fire authority and I need to take action quickly. I need to write to the legal owner, the
Yeah,
leaseholder of the flat, and really make a plan to address this because it was a huge fire
yes.
loading
Yeah.
risk. And you imagine most of these listed buildings converted in the 60s, 70s, 80s, they didn't double plasterboard the
Mm,
underside of the joists or put in, fireproof insulation or anything like that. It was just literally
yeah.
board, or it was lath and plaster and a skim. And yeah,
What was he collecting? Newspapers and books?
yeah, collect magazines, collected
Magazine.
furniture, collected electrical items,
Oh,
kettles and things. So I was like, oh, okay, God. Anyway,
yeah.
he gradually actually he was the leaseholder was really responsible. They started to reduce the amount
Demand.
of clutter that there was, and that was a part of a success. And actually, when I was there, this was my first stint at the business that I was at. We did run a project, and we had a brand new, fully interlinked, fully addressable fire alarm system, which is the common parts and each of the flats, smoke detector sounders behind the flat door, and for some of the flats that we'd identified some of the types of resident profiles, so we actually had additional heat detectors placed in that
Mm,
building.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so we dealt with it and we learnt it. But then I left the business. I ended up coming back, and when I came back, it was just at the cusp of there having been a significant fire.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it was actually from that flat, and
Okay.
that okay. So that flat was a total loss in insurance speak. So the first thing I was like, okay, did we get that reinstatement cost assessment carried out? Yes, it had been done.
Yeah.
This is a significant building. The
Wow.
adjoining basement flat had significant fire and smoke damage. The whole floor flat level above it had suffered significant damage and
Wow.
it wasn't a total loss, but I think nearly all the rooms had to be stripped back to brick. And we uncovered crazy things, listed, or so I say, latent defects that you'd never know until the plaster comes off. Oh, there's a
Yes.
really big crack in the wall and the substrate. Of course, that part of the insurance claim is probably not catered for.
Wow.
So you start to unpick. And I think going back to your question, and something I do feel quite passionate about is how complex claims get handled. And I
Mm.
didn't handle it perfectly, and I learned a lot of things through the course of this. But it,
As we
it
do.
was
That's why it's important to work with our brokers closely.
your brokers. We had a really good broker actually. They were really good. We had a good network of independent surveyors, and I'd managed enough. Unfortunately, I'd managed another fire claim previously where really sadly there actually had been a fatality.
Oh.
Yeah, so probably unlucky as a property manager in 8 years to have, I think I had 3 fires, 1 fatality and 2 significant losses. So I'd learned a lot. I dealt with a
I've
lot
not
of
had
this.
any fires in 10 years.
Don't say that.
Right.
You're going to be fine. But we knew some good main contractors. We had a really good insurance broker who was really involved claims handler.
Mm.
I'd known enough about claims to make sure that I wanted to have an independent chartered surveyor actually manage the specification of works. There was there was schedulers condition such as it was when there'd been a bad fire. But for the other flats, when you're knocking around and doing significant works in buildings, there's party wall matters. So both vertically and horizontally.
Mm.
There's neighbourhood matters because there was adjoining property. That was
Yeah.
fun. So there's a communication plan around that. There's the being on site, meeting the loss adjuster and the surveyor. There's never forgetting the smell that goes into your clothes.
Mm.
So I was at
Stayed
the
for months.
it stays for months. I don't know if I ever got it out. I can still, if I think about it. In fact, when we went to the TPI and the PMLS Oxford Weekender a few weeks ago, one of the insurance brokers, they run a really good play. It's
Hmm.
absolutely fantastic. Paul Robertson really knows his stuff, and they act out significant peril and claims process. That's for another time, but
Oh, I
I'd
hope I
recommend
can join next year.
anyone to go to it. It's so worth going. But actually, handling the claim and having a really good broker, surveyor,
Yeah.
and a point of contact with the client and ownership of tasks is so important. I think the hardest thing that I'd never encountered before is when you have one leaseholder whose flat has been gutted and they were planning on doing some improvement works.
Oh, convenient.
Have you
Just
ever
on
have you ever
top.
had that?
I had, yes. But it was a fight, and yeah.
Yeah, and I was probably too nice, and we said, okay, well, we can do this, but it then results in concurrent requests for alteration and then consent for that. I want to put an underfloor heating.
Mm.
Okay, they were allowed to do that, and who's going to pay the extras? How is it going to work with the insurance payments and the transactions? And then the poor surveyor who's going to have to then do additional administrative and contract administration work as part of this has a significant amount of extra work. He
Yeah.
then had to organise his fees separate to that with this other leaseholder,
Mhm.
whilst everything else is going on with decant, with the building's insurer paying for a facilities company to take away contents, for example.
Yes.
I would say they handle themselves in an exemplary way. But as soon as you start removing people's personal possessions, even though someone else is handling it, you're the property manager.
Yeah.
Joe, I'd just like to let you know that my family heirloom of this period, um, what do you call them? Like a dresser, a bit of furniture with inset walnut edging detail.
Oh wow, yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
this was very special to me. I haven't had it valued, but it's thousands of pounds. It's been damaged. What are you going to do about it?
Oh wow, yeah. Go to all
So,
the antique stores nearby.
so I suppose that's one. What did I learn? Yeah, get your reinstatement cost assessment done.
Yeah,
Communicate with everybody. Communicate again, but also learn to say no, which was I didn't do so well. You know, maybe you can't carry on making alterations and keep on tweaking it, which is then having an effect on the program for the reinstatement of the other properties because of start to finish dependencies. So
God.
yeah,
And
that's a taster.
how many units was the building?
It's only
10.
10.
10, yeah. I often have the issue when people will be keeping personal items, even like, like a proper coat hanger and, shoe. And I'm like, you just can't have these. And not to say Christmas decoration and anything. I mean, we've seen it all, right? And
Mm.
it's, you keep sending emails, letters, notices. You have to remove, you have to remove.
Yeah, things for removing and enforcing the terms of the lease, the most emotional ones, people's pets.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
really hard. People's children. I had a complaint of a strange thumping noise coming from a flat above. It was repeating, and there was a pattern to it. The
yeah.
mind boggles, doesn't it?
How long did the project took with resolving the whole
Oh, the
claim?
fire
And
project was
yeah,
is well over a year. It's probably 2 years start to finish.
so people were
Alternative accommodation,
relocated. Yeah, wow,
relocated out, then in. Yeah, it was a long project. I mean, it was very challenged.
I can imagine. But they've
Pavement.
I hope you got a big thank you at the end.
I did get some thank yous. Actually, we had a testimonial from the client. I did have a lovely thank you of a mixed creative wine from a lovely guy on a lovely listed building in Clifton near the suspension bridge, and it was a big escape of water claim, and it had been happening for a little while, and he'd not long fitted a lovely engineered hard floor in the basement. So no problem with noise transfer, another big alarm bell. But he was lovely. Yeah, he sent me a card and a box of wine to my home address. So it does happen sometimes.
It just shows how important it is to prioritize the tasks when you're dealing with not just fire but anything really in at work, isn't it?
Yeah, I think having had in my first stint, probably in the second or third year, having had the fire where I had to be there on the weekend in the morning, meeting the family. Um, yeah, it kind of it really reinstills the passion in why you do it. If you've got these buildings and the forest assessment says, of course they're not that helpful in terms of when they're not. It's not mandatory. It's just a listed converted building. We recommend you install a fully addressable fire alarm system in this and emergency lighting. Da, 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 da,
Yeah,
and you do it, but they save lives, 100%. You know,
yeah,
I,
absolutely. It's also the balance of the needs of leaseholders and freeholders and managing agent. It's just something that it's sometimes with some projects is so difficult to navigate. There's so many parties and everyone is like, but Relitza. So
Sometimes
well,
you've got to walk away though, right? You can say no. I mean, I only fell out with I think two clients in my 8.5 years and part of company. What one was, it was recommended they do get at least some emergency lighting in, and he said, Joe, we can just put some torches on the landings. Okay, that's really clever.
yeah,
You're just trying to spend our money for us. Well, no, I'm just trying to act in the best interest. So you'll get
absolutely.
people like that, of course.
Yeah, all the time, and this is why telling these stories are so important.
So many stories. I mean, I think the hardest, harder than that was neighbour disputes when they turn really ugly.
I
That's
think I have about 3 cases currently going on, and like you said earlier, you just have to walk away sometimes. And I in one cases I said I want to speak to to the management company's representative, which is a law firm, and I said I would like to speak to them to understand where we stand, because
mm,
it is just the whole. My colleague Karida will come and speak to that, about that case at some point. But it is something that it's, come on, guys, let's sit down and talk about it, before it goes to spending thousands and thousands of pounds on fees.
And who pays? Because in theory, if they want you to spend the fees, then it should be the complainant who's indemnifying the management company, the service charge account, ultimately to pursue that.
But it also sometimes is the management company towards the leaseholder.
Yeah, because there's an obligation to not allow nuisance and annoyance to persist. So how do you know where to step in and step out? And I think it is one of the hardest things that you can deal with. And I know many managing agents say we're not going to get involved, but if you're the receiving end of the leaseholder's solicitor who's representing them with a catalogue of the nuisance and annoyance, and you're there being obliged to uphold the terms of the lease on behalf of the management company, it's horrific.
I think in this particular case that I mentioned, this is the reason why I want to speak to the law firm. Just it's a law firm we don't work with, so I don't really know who to approach, and I'm just waiting to hear from them because yes, the lease, but at the same time, it's I don't want us to make a wrong move, and then obviously there is a lot at stake, and each party can come back to us with, but you said you did, and
Mm.
you issued, you did, and it is important to to balance that in a way that we are property managers, we're not solicitors,
Well, I think it's such a valid point. My biggest tip on that is to start off with making the complainant keep a diary of what's happened, but it's specific on what information they record. So it's when did it occur, what was it, and how did it affect you? Because those are the things that get brought up in terms of a legal process. So for my case, it was threats of physical violence, it was intimidation
Oh, wow.
between the leaseholders. Eventually, some of that threat came towards me personally as well.
Tell
Um,
me more.
yeah, it was really challenging setup. There was two leaseholders. One was on the face of it, both very intelligent people. One had worked in the security trade, a mature guy. Um, and he had an issue with, I think, noise transfer with the guy below. It's the guy below
Hmm.
that was being affected, and he was a very sensitive chap. And they were never going to be best friends, and it just got exacerbated, and it got worse and worse and worse. And in the end, there were threats. Some of it I think were false, some of it I think was true. I will never know. But that ended up with the legal route and spending far too much time going to solicitors' offices trying to understand the process. That was time taken away from doing the day job and trying to keep the rest of my portfolio compliant.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that's a story that put an end to me being a block manager, because
Oh, wow.
yeah, it was that, and I had several things happening concurrently. um,
The
mm,
one story that sums up how unpredictable unpredictable the industry is, and just the job in general. And how do you approach this? How do you resolve neighborly disputes? You're just, so much information is thrown at you, and you're
yeah,
like, I'm not here to make a decision or to,
God, I mean, we had acousticians for professional
yes,
recordings.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
so recordings that were then submitted. Um,
Mm,
Then we had, yeah, the legals and recommending a course of action. Again, at the end of the day, it was to soundproof between the flats and who was going to pay for it. But if there's a loggerheads, and I'm not going to pay for it, I'm not going to pay for it. No, I didn't take the carpet up. Yes, you did take the floor up. Yeah, is the floor alteration consented? Well, it's still affecting me. Should the management company just cut its losses and then pay to actually make an improvement to the acoustic insulation between particular apartments just to deal with it? But then that takes a board of directors to agree it and
yeah,
effectively to pass it potentially at an extraordinary general meeting or something, just to say that's what we're going to do to draw a line. Because sometimes a dispute gets so ingrained, you have to declare it in the LPE1 process, because it's one
yes,
of the questions.
yeah,
Are there any known disputes? Well, if it's been minuted in directors' meetings, what are we going to do about it? Then it's known. Then you've got to declare it. So it got so bad that it was
absolutely.
affecting individual flat value and saleability,
Mm,
and then that blame was then coming back to us as a managing agent, because it wasn't being managed, in the perfect way. But what is the perfect way?
yeah. And were there any works done during the management, or on the
So in the end,
or
I know that story did resolve itself with, and I think the management company remediated the failings in terms of the floor between those particular flats, and I think the owner above moved away, and then sadly the owner who lived in the flat below passed away.
okay.
Um, so it was again, yeah, slightly tragic stories that unfolded.
But you in conversions, it's very often when you get these issues with floors, right? With noise, and you can put rugs and everything, but it's just you can't just stop it with that. And recently, with
Yeah,
obviously the new insulation and good flooring, that it's still there a little bit. And if you're sensitive on noise, you just definitely
yeah,
hear
you
it.
can have your noise dampening. You can have your, I think they call them resilient bars, so you kind of create acoustic gaps around the perimeter edges of floors, and there's all sorts of things. But this was a listed building. I think it was
Mm,
originally built in the early 18th century. It was a conversion. It had been a hospital. It had been an asylum. It has a fascinating history. Um, but you talk about it in an AGM or in directors meeting. It's like, oh, it's a developer's fault. We go after the developer. Oh, the developer went bust. Of course, the developer went bust. Is this a common theme? You hear this?
yeah,
Okay, well, let's go to the records office. Let's go to the local authority and track down the drawings. The drawings mean diddly, right? As drawn, as built. Who
yeah.
knows what happened when the carpenters were in that particular wing, or what they were dealing with, or whether or not the floor had been amended, samples are taken. So, I think there's probably some tough love actually sometimes. Look, the developer's bust, the local authority hasn't got the drawings, or they've lost them. You just need to bite the bullets, accept what's
Yeah.
happened, and self-solve in the most practical possible
Mm.
way, agree it and move
Mm.
on.
But it was also signed off at the back then when the building was built or the renovations were done. It was signed and up to those standards. It was all compliant, right?
Yeah, those records were
Mm.
never found because they actually
Oh,
disappeared. I think, with
oh,
particular the local authority. I think they had a fire in inverted commas, and and you just, the mind boggles, and whatever could go wrong, I think did go wrong on that one, and the history of it. But I don't think it's that uncommon. Conversions happen.
yeah.
Sometimes corners are cut. Look, building is difficult. Dealing with listed building is difficult. I think it's different now because there will be a better inspection regime. But government
The new
outsourced
builds, yes,
inspections, new builds,
but we still have a lot of conversions that we manage, across UK. So
and
the
yeah, and
that issue is still there.
it's still there, and you'll uncover them when things happen, when people fall out with each other, when there's a fire, or when there's a bad leak between flats. That's when it will all get found out, because you end up with a surveyor who's going to direct an intrusive investigation, and they'll go to the builder. All right, I want you to take down this section of ceiling, and we'll have a look at it. And then you really start to analyze the fabric of that building, what the eye can't see when there's
Which
a ceiling.
also, yeah, which also is an issue. Sometimes when there is a dispute like this, and you propose these works, let's cut a hole on the ceiling, or any whatever the situation is, and they're like, no, we're not doing this in my home. No, you're not doing that. Well, how are we going to resolve if we don't take next steps? And so these are the disputes that you have with leaseholders, because as much as you're trying to understand, to explain to them what are you trying to do so they can understand and accommodate this, it's very difficult, because they might be the flat below and they're not affected by the flat above, sorry, and they're not affected by it. So again, disputes, problems, process, and it's all come to us to navigate this balance between leaseholders, us, and
Hmm.
sending surveyors or attending with surveyors
Yeah.
and carrying out all these inspections.
And recording it as well. If you have to go through any kind of legal process, they want the audit trail, they want a chronology. And if you're just there on emails, that is a nightmare trail. If you've got it documented in, great system like Fixflo, other great systems out there, but there is an audit trail with time and date stamp, who did what, said what to who, and when. It's all there,
Mm,
good stuff like
yeah.
that. But the thing that really probably takes the biscuit of all these is a 1970s block I managed of about just under 100 flats. and there was a leaseholder who had one flat, and it was typical kind of concrete box, which is great from fire protection. So flat here, communal hallway, flat there. Medical students living in one side, and a paranoid schizophrenic in the other, and he was having a bad episode. But his parent owned the flat outright, so there's no mortgage on it. And then there'd been increasing complaints from multiple people, strange noises, strange behaviour,
Yeah.
shouting, rowing,
Right. Yeah.
stone throwing, vandalism, all sorts of things. It was just getting worse and worse and worse. And I was liaising with the owner because they're my contractual point of contact, but obviously the tenant, for all purposes, was having a really hard time. And it did come to a head in the end when he was having such a bad episode. He put burning rags through his neighbour's letterbox on the communal
No.
landing, and then proceeded to try and super glue up the lock and the door. I mean, they're on the first floor over a raised walkway, so it was a fairly easy escape. But that's a terrifying situation if you're that neighbour, and for that person who's having that kind of blow up of extreme mental health challenges, and then police being called, and then you being the property manager receiving an email saying, just to let you know that this person has done this, the flat's okay, the fire's been put out, it wasn't too significant. But it's just when you get that kind of email coming into you and the backdrop of all the other things that are happening, it's like, this is extreme. This is what dealing with when you have blocks of flats that aren't intended to be old people's homes or student accommodation or people with higher support needs, but are all borderline, and you get that, it's a really heady mix. And I think that's one of the things that no one tells you when you start out in property management. You learn it quickly.
Yeah. That is, we need to write a guidance book of how to go through complex, you know, challenges.
I got plugged into social services. I was told by someone to speak to social services. Oh yes, this person's known to us. Okay,
Oh,
well, where's the support plan? What's happening? Is he fit to live independently?
yeah. That's
It's
interesting.
it's terrifying what happens, and the disconnect between support services is true. That's what's
And
happened. And also you need to have at least some kind of policy on lone working as well. It's increasingly important. Talked to people like Shelley Jacobs and
yeah, yeah,
Jodie Fraser are doing some great
yeah.
presentations on that, and
I'm hoping to have them both here and talk about it
fantastic.
because it is important for also leaseholders to understand what we are going
Yeah,
through.
because it's expensive, right? You're running your business, Relitzer, and if you have to send two people out, I know when I went to certain properties, that was going to be me and another, because it's so unpredictable. We had a guy coming into the office and he actually was a shared owner and he was a supported housing. He was a housing association tenant. He was the only one in the block of, I think it was only 8 flats, and he did some really crazy stuff. He came in
Mm,
threatening. He was sexually abusive language to young female members of the team in the front office. He used to laugh at me, and he called me Joe 90. I laugh about it now, but he was terrifying.
wow.
If you want kind of tales of the unexpected, tales from the block, this guy was so aggressive to decorators on site that they downed tools and left. These were, you know, most trades guys who are working up and down scaffolds, they're not really shrinking violets, but these guys are like, no, we're scared of this guy because he's threatened to do. I'm going to do you in if you come back and try and paint my door. I'm going to do you in.
Yeah.
I had to get security and charge it back to the housing association.
I think there will be a lot of stories that will be told here.
I can't wait to hear more. There'll be like a top 10, won't there, Relitzer, who's
Yes.
got the wackiest story. I read one on LinkedIn. I've got to send it to you, and it was I think a partner had fallen out, man and woman, and I think she'd sent him out. What was the story? I think he'd end up in the communal corridor without any clothes on, and she'd set the fire
Oh,
alarm off to bring people out.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
but I don't want to steal anyone else's thunder.
No, no, send it to me. I might track the person
Mm.
down and just invite him to tell us more about it.
Listen,
Do you think what's your observation on in terms of property managers? What common mistakes do property managers make?
it's such a big and hard question. Um,
Okay, let's get
either do
yeah,
too much
yeah,
or do too little.
yeah.
That's what I think. Is that there's this happy balance. For me, I was a do too much, yes, and very hard to say no. So
Mm,
you end up in this whirlwind of spinning plates everywhere, and you want to get everything perfect. Or you take on another external decorations project to squeeze it in this summer. You think you're just about managed to do it, but really you probably don't have the time, and you should manage expectations and communicate and replan those big ticket items, especially if the wheels are falling off where you've got concurrent bonkers insurance claims or disputes.
yeah. In my opinion, we as property managers, the common mistake is that we're trying to do everything and
Yeah.
be everywhere, and we shouldn't really.
How can you not sometimes? I don't know if you follow Mike Wong on LinkedIn. He put an amazing post on a few weeks ago. He'd be great for this session.
I
Uh,
don't think I know him.
Oh,
Please
I'll
introduce me.
introduce you. Yeah, he's lovely, and he posts some brilliant things about all the hats that you wear. So when we have new staff at Fixflo and they learn about block, I do a slide deck, a day in the
Hmm.
life of a block manager, and
Oh,
I say, well, you're a surveyor, a counsellor, property manager, financial guru, loss adjuster,
yeah.
all those hats that you wear, and it's inherently challenging, right?
Yeah. Well, tell me, well, let's talk about tech because obviously now you are at Fixflo, you're no longer a property manager, but you support property managers. You understand, property management role very
Yeah.
well. So how do you how do you support property managers?
Okay, that's a great question. Thank you. So my passion and why I'm still here is I know that good tech and Fixflow and other things that integrate with it really do make a day-to-day difference to your I- I- yeah, like sanity almost, because I had things on notepads and spreadsheets and collating it. So for solicitors' inquiries or preparing for a directors meeting, it just took such a long time. I know, within 3 or 4 clicks,
Mm,
I'm not lying. You can collate what it is that you've done and prove what you have done for that client in a particular time frame. You can log it easily, and there it's done. If it's that insurance claim, you can log it into the system. It's time and date stamped. Again, that's really important from a cover point of view in terms of notifying the insurer. So I think tech plays a huge role. AI is becoming massive. You're pioneering some things with your own business, which is really exciting to see. There's more of it happening, whether it's reading leases, interpreting mem and arts.
yeah.
In our world, it's reading risk assessments to create your risk actions. So it's doing the bulk of that admin.
Mm.
Because so many property managers, I hear these horror stories all the time. They've had the FRA done, but they've just put it in a drawer effectively. They've not really started going through the risk actions,
Yeah, especially if it's a very long
especially if it's very long. The
very
preambles go on for
technical.
20 pages, and then you've got, oh, here are the 10 things, 30 things, 40, 60
Yeah.
things you've got to do,
Mm.
stripping those out, prioritizing. Look, tech's massive in service charge administration, and there are, great CRMs. We don't do that. Which saves such huge amounts of time, reconciliation, um, just tracking day-to-day maintenance, because that's what the customers, the residents and leaseholders
Mm.
care about. They care about, are their pavers clean and not slippery? Do the lights work? Um, are the communals safe? And does the
Correct.
roof not leak? Yeah.
Correct. But also like softwares like Fixflow and others that are out there, they're they're there to help us. I often ask clients, why are you not using the software? Because obviously we firstly it's all recorded there.
Mm,
Second, everyone can see it and it's easy to track and it's easy to see when it was reported, what it was done, and so on and so on. And they're like, we're simply not interested. And I actually a few days ago I had a call from a building in central London, and they're like, um, invited us to tender. Great. But we're not interested in any portals, any softwares that you're using. for reporting. And I said, well, how are we supposed to, it's a big building.
How big is it? I'm really surprised to hear that.
The 30,
What, so it's, yeah,
yeah.
mansion block of sorts.
And also said we want as minimal interaction as possible. We have a property manager to do that. But how does the property manager do that? And obviously I can see who is managing them currently. And I honestly want to pick up the phone and just ask them, how do you manage this building? Because I'm surprised from
Yeah.
the question that what I was told, that we're not interested in any softwares that you may have. And we're not going to report anything there. And we want you to come round to the building as often as possible so you can see. Yeah, but I can maybe attend it today, but
Yeah.
tomorrow someone is reporting an issue. So we don't live, we're not concierge services either at the building. So
I think there's a place for that in some sort of high end blocks where they just want that, and that's a communication thing, isn't it? At the start, so if you're pitching, we use X, Y, and Z, but then it's what type of client are you? What type of managing agent are you? So there'll be some that say they want minimum interaction. Fine. Well, then do you agree that we can spend up to X without consulting you? We'll just get it done, and then you won't notice us, and maybe that's the arrangement that they want. But it's hard for you because you don't want them to come back and finger point.
no, absolutely. And part of our tender, it's also introducing our AI property manager, because I
Okay,
think it's
yeah,
a great thing
yeah, it
to
is.
have. And we're trying to track that data and to see how it's working. And it's something that it takes so much time and effort to and information to train. Is like a human property manager, but it's AI, and you
Yeah,
need to train them. They need
I think
information.
I think your Lily's going to be fantastic. She's great.
She's great. We also have Helen, but I won't tell you anything yet.
Okay, oh, now
Maybe
you've got
just
got me thinking.
yeah.
But no, look, tech, property management people, buildings. They are all different, aren't they? And there's kind of the buildings are easy. It's the people that are hard.
Yes, and this is why I sometimes hear me out. Just give me a few minutes, because
Mm,
I'm trying to explain why and the reasons why we're doing what we're doing. Because if tech and AI is used in the correct way, it's a great help for both parties, right? Because leasehold clients want transparency, right? A leaseholder can call and say, well, why are we paying so much for this? And they have right to see what we spend money on. And they're like, the softwares we use, with one click, it's all there. Why don't you help us, to put all the data so we can manage them in a fastest, as easiest way? Then I can put my time and effort into something that AI and tech can't do, like pick up
mm,
the phone. Because I think we're losing the human touch sometimes, because there are so many emails that you have to respond to, and mainly with disputes, mainly with disagreements, mainly with neighboring matters. And that's majority of the admin that is on day to day.
mm.
So Lily cannot really help with that. So I want to call sometimes, um, you know, Pam from X block, and speak to her and just tell her that I'm doing my best to help with so and so on. But I don't have time, because someone else is occupying my time with stuff that, you know, sending them information that is actually on the portal. They just go and see it. So it is difficult. It is difficult, and having having this overview of AI and tech, and knowing how this can help us, the industry, not just us as a company, but as an industry. And I would have more guests who will talk about AI and why we should use it, because it's there to help, right, to ease our job.
You're so right. I do think So one of the things that I hear is I'm not ready to invest in digital tech, in software, because I like the old-fashioned approach. I was like, well, no, you're misunderstanding. It
Mm,
buys you the time to do those softer skill pieces, to have those communications, have those
yeah.
meetings if other things are happening in the background. So I think, yeah, you put that very
A-
well.
Absolutely. And I think we should continue, I don't know, providing more information to, and not just Fixflo, any software that is out there, just to continue that support for property managers, because you guys are doing great and you're definitely helping my day to day.
Oh,
So
thank you. And I think the future is exciting for all, all the players out there in terms of systems, because we hold so much data, and if you start to plug that into Internet of Things and sensors, and this is coming more into newer builds where they're in, because it's hard to you know, put in things like leak detectors. That's fraught with complexities, but as new buildings come on, they're starting to get more techy. That will speak to systems. Like lifts already
yeah,
have
yeah,
remote elevator monitoring. It tells someone in a contact center that it's about to break down, or it is dodgy, and it can dispatch an engineer.
yeah, yeah,
So that's going to become more commonplace. But
yeah.
this is fast forwarding. I think property still, there's a long way to go in terms of tech adoption. Full stop.
I think I agree with you, and I've recently had a chat with someone. So they actually do these panels that you can
Hmm.
display in the communal areas. Um,
Love
we
that.
manage fairly smaller, predominantly smaller buildings, so obviously, yes, the money will be an issue for some, but again, it doesn't matter whether your building is 3 or 30 units. The help is there, and it's all visible and it's all transparent, and not so much for the owners because they might not even live there, but it's for the residents, you
Yeah.
know, um, because we very often as well have um, agents, tenants that are changing quite often, and the owners not they don't tell us on time
Yeah.
that
Well, the owners
someone
don't know sometimes illegal subletting.
or that. Yes. Oh, yeah. We often get Airbnb link, or this property is um and yeah. So it is something that we need to make sure that we work together on, because we live in a digital world, and it's not going to
Yeah.
go any less than what it. But you know,
Yeah. They're good, those panels. Are we allowed to shout out some of those people?
yes, yeah,
So yeah, it's Greg Elliott at 30 Seconds Media, great
that's what I
guy.
meant.
There we go. Lovely panels. I remember
Yeah.
speaking to Chris years ago on a site I had, which should have been perfect for it. There you go. I was always looking for the tech angle, but these things can be helpful. Yes, there's a small cost
Mm.
in them, but I think it just kind of elevates the value of a particular property. I think if you come into really well decorated, good, great communication tools, there'll always be people who won't see value, but there will be people who do see value and can be persuaded, and that's just a bit of a
But they don't see value. Why? Because they've never used them,
yeah,
most likely.
because we've always done it this way.
Well, yeah, but the industry is changing. We're evolving for better.
100%. So but we are talking to each other. We're preaching to the converted amongst ourselves, and I hope that some of your listeners will be on that page too.
Mm.
But there's some great stuff out there, and there's more to come. And if it can help you deal with some of the crazies that we've discussed today, Relitza, then that is a very good thing. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not sure they will stop, but at least we will know how to handle them, because, like, what advice would you give to someone just entering the industry? What advice would you give to a property manager who is entering the industry and hasn't got a clue of all these scenarios that you've mentioned earlier that may come on
if
his.
they're if they're fresh in and they've got an eyes open, I would say, okay, use AI, look at some of the scenarios. It will give you some surprisingly good answers. Um,
Prompt ChatGPT very well.
ask your more experienced colleagues. Be in the office to have those interactions as well. It's not just working from home, locked away, slowly going mad. I think that's really important for block managers. Having a hybrid setup is important. Read the lease, understand the governance structure of resident management companies, right to manage companies, common hold, freehold, and the nuances, and communicate. Because if you communicate in a succinct way and seek direction and receive it and log it, then that's a big part of the battle. Don't get involved in protracted email back and forth when you suspect that someone is possibly starting to show that they're a bit unhinged. Meet them, have a cup of coffee, phone them up. It's too easy just to be stuck behind a WhatsApp or an email.
Yeah.
Actually talk to them, because email warriors exist constantly, and
Oh, yeah.
once you've had that meeting, it just calms it down. It's a much better relationship, and it will calm down. If that could stop 5 emails a day, and if you do that gradually and you meet that person in each block and don't just shy away from it, they're 9 times out of 10 they're perfectly good people. You just need to have that contact and that trust element. Those would be my top tips.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of tech, um, where do you see block management, and how far? You said you don't see it soon, but like how how far are we talking? Because again, you guys running these softwares and spending so much time of coding and doing everything, it's a lot of work and effort, and
Yeah, it's
working
expensive.
closely
Yeah,
with, yeah, and working closely with any professionals in the block management industry. It's I think it's great what you do, but again,
I think embrace it. I think talk to people like myself. We'll have a straight up conversation about where we're at, what the roadmap looks like, what else is out there in terms of partners, um, and
use
and
it,
tr- and
use it.
use it. Yeah, use it.
Don't
Do
use
do
those
do the
spreadsheets.
tutorials. Get some bespoke training if you need to, and buy that in. Have someone really walk you through it, because it's so valuable.
Mm,
And the more you use it, the more you benefit, and the more people that use it, the more that we can expand it and make it better. So that would be my call,
absolutely.
my call to action in terms of tech. But there's still a way to go. I hear a lot of
Yeah.
frustration out there. I know a lot of it can be solved fairly quickly, but it's going to take us time to get the information in or on board. It'll take a bit of time, but you can do it
Yeah.
gradually. But it's not that painful. Hopefully you'd agree.
No, and that's what me and my colleagues we try to do is like gradually put information in. That is the most important. And let's just start with little tasks and have expectations for the client as well. In terms of what is going, because that you can't onboard everything, if especially if it's a bigger building. Imagine running spreadsheets.
Can't do
It's
that. You get
impossible.
have an asset register, right? I can hear the voice of a really lovely guy who's an ex-industry leader. He's probably in his 70s or 80s. It's probably his 80s. He said, "Joe, I just want to see the asset register for the building, and I want to know it's all compliant." I'm like, "Yeah, I know you do." And we didn't have any of these systems, and it was my spreadsheet, and it was a meeting, and it was yes, and we've had it serviced, and here's a proof of the certificate. So those things can be digitized pretty easily. It's not much more an investment than continuing to run it in a manual basis. I'm kind of all talked up now because I'm so passionate about it. You use that. What is the make and the model of it? Where is it in the building? What is the key code to the lockbox to get the key out? All those kind of things. Because I was like looking at my phone. I'd have a note. What's the key code for that? It'd be in a spreadsheet in the office. I couldn't access it. I'd be phoning up. I go, "Hi, can you give me the code?" It's like you know how it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I know how it is. Joe, it's been pleasure.
Thank you, Relitza.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
so
having me
much.
on your new podcast, Tales from the Block. It's fun, and hopefully I haven't overshared too much
Oh,
on those
no.
stories. But
Come back, share
no
more.
names were mentioned, no animals were hurt, and I'll end on, "Dear Joe, please can you have a word with X in flat Y because their cat is defecating in my favourite planter." Okay, thank you. Well, you
I'm
live in a
sure
wooded
someone
area.
came across that. I'm sure someone came across that.
The joys of dealing
Amazing.
with the people. But it's a very interesting job, and property managers make a huge difference. It's really important, and I would recommend anyone getting into it to do their homework and follow their continuous professional development, get their TPI stuff sorted, do all of these things, go to CPD events, go and network, because you get so much out of it.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Relitza.